In Rome, the gods were not distant legends. They were obligations, silent burdens that pressed upon every doorway, hearth, and breath. Before the marble temples rose, before the Capitoline Triad reigned, there were the Numina shadowy spirits, forceful yet nameless, presiding over thresholds, forests, rivers. They demanded ritual, not devotion. They would not be ignored. The Romans believed in pax deorum, the peace of gods, and understood that the gods' favor was not bestowed freely, but earned by ritual precision. In their view, religion was not belief but contract. Offerings, sacrifices, correct words, correct time. Failed the rite, incur divine wrath. No apologies would assuage a misstep. When Rome encountered Greek myth, it absorbed, reshaped, and repurposed it. Jupiter stood atop his throne, but his stories were grafted onto earlier Italic spirits. Juno, Vesta, Mars every one a mask over deeper forces. Emperors would later claim divinity, but this too was structure, power backed by celestial sanction. In the shadows of temples, in the hush of nighttime rites, Romans whispered names of gods, of ancestors, of unknown spirits. They lived surrounded by divinity, yet always uncertain which face of God they had offended. And in that tension, fear, respect, power. Rome's religion would become one of its greatest dominions. Part 1. Numina in the shadows, the hidden powers of the ancients. In the hush before dawn, when the city of Rome still lay half asleep beneath her temples and columns, the world was alive not with men, but with power. Invisible threads of divinity, threaded through stone thresholds, hearth fires, river stones, groves at the city's edge. These were the Numinate gods of legend, but the ancient spirits of force, the hidden powers Rome had to placate if it wished to breathe. The Romans believed that nothing in the world was quite sacred or profane. Everything bore a presence, an unnamed force whose will could tip fate. In those quiet hours, before the unthinking bustle of marketplace and forum, offerings were laid, prayers whispered, incense kindled, not to worship, but to acknowledge that the gods were watching. Long before Jupiter sat enthroned in the Capitoline, the earliest Romans held no pantheon. Their religion was animistic, born from fertile fields, woods, springs, boundaries. Every object, every door hinge, field, spring, boundary, stone carried its numen. These spirits were not persons, with stories and personalities. They were forces. They could bless or wound, stay hidden or erupt into the world. Numina were not deities. They were powers. The Latin word numen is rooted in nuere, to nod, or to signify consent, suggesting a divine will that manifests, that nods from the unseen. To the Roman mind, cosmic order hinged on careful ritual. Religion was not about faith or doctrine. It was a contract. Observe your rituals strictly. Give what is owed, and in turn, the Numina would keep the world from collapsing. To neglect them was to risk pestilence, famine, civil unrest, or the anger of the unseen. These spirits were countless. The Indigidimenta, a register kept by the priests, listed many obscure, functional forces. Some looked after infants, some protected travels, others watched over doorways, thresholds, boundaries, households. Every act of life, from birth to death, was overseen. A newborn child's first cry, a seed planted, a herd driven to pasture. Each needed the proper prayer to its numen to ensure favor, not disaster. Beneath this diffuse spirituality, Rome built its religion upward. As Rome grew, contact with Etruscan and Greek religious forms brought anthropomorphic gods Jupiter, Juno, Mars onto this foundation. But even as these gods gained narratives and personalities, the old shadows of Numina remained. Jupiter's thunderbolt was a nod of force, Juno's gaze a weight. Vesta's hearth was the locus of sacred flame, the old felt force beneath the mythic shape. In every Roman home, the invisible was present. The paterfamilias was priest of his household. At the hearth, he tended the flame of Vesta. At the cupboard, he offered to the Penates. At the threshold, he whispered to the Janus of the door. The Lares watched homes and fields. The genius for men, or Juno for women, of the head watched over the individual's life force. The dead, the demons, lingered in shadows, needing propitiation to remain quiet, lest they return in vengeance. These rituals were fragile. One misstep, wrong word, incorrect offering, impure knife could offend the Numen. It would not forgive. The pious Roman measured sacrifice, uttered prayers precisely, timed gestures with precision. Every priest, every augur, every pontifex guarded the liturgy as though it were a law. Religion in Rome was law, ritual was contract. The jus sacrum, the sacred law, was inseparable from public law. Yet the Numina were capricious, their favor could turn. The farmers saw vine disease, sudden blight, lightning in midday sky, rivers flooded, forests caught fire. Romans believed that misfortune did not come by chance. It was the Numina displeased, so they sought ways to placate them. A ritual, a sacrifice, a vow. The state lent its weight. Public sacrifices, festivals, processions. The Senate would call games. The ludi and priests would read omens from birds, inspect entrails. They tried to coax the unseen into alignment with Roman will. In war, this power was paramount. Before battles, generals would pray to Mars or Bellona, but also to all Numina of war, of munitions, of spears, of the road the army would march. The augurs watched the flight of sacred birds. A falcon crosswise, or an eagle flying low, might be a bad omen. Soldiers waited for ritual signs. A disrespected Numen could mean defeat if Roman legions were strong. To Rome, victory was never just swords and training. It was alignment with the unseen world. But the Numina could be harnessed politically. Emperors later used their numen as a form of sacred sanction. The numen, Augusta, the divine presence of the emperor, was worshipped in the imperial cult. Citizens swore loyalty not just to Terra and Senate, but to the numen of the ruler. It allowed the emperor to step into divinity while still maintaining the language of piety over blasphemy. In the provinces, the numina shitted local god springs, rivers, forest, spirits clung to worship even under Roman rule. Some merged with Roman gods. Others survived in hidden altars. In Gaul, the spirit of the river mingled with Roman Neptune. In Syria, local sky gods overlapped with Jupiter. The empire did not wholly extinguish local divinities. More often, it overlapped them, reorganizing them, absorbing them under Roman names. This blending preserved the presence of Numina in new form, yet influence is not control. A local peasant might still whisper to a spring nymph in his village well, even as he also sent coins to Jupiter in the temple. He understood that in this layered spiritual world, the great gods may be distant, but the small Numen at the door was immediate. He feared the unseen behind him more than the emperor above. In the dark hours, a traveler might pause at a crossroads, set a dish of grain to the spirits, asking safety in the night. A mother would gather water and whisper an offering. A farmer would garland a boundary stone on Terminalia to secure his land's edge. A soldier might pour wine on a rock and whisper to its spirit before crossing a river. These acts were intimate, urgent. They acknowledged that the world was woven not just of flesh and stone, but of unseen wills. So when Rome built temples to Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, it held great festivals, erected statues. It did not replace the Numina, it overlaid them. It created grand stages for divine politics. But the constant was still the whisper of presence behind walls, the weight of unseen eyes at every threshold. For in Rome, to live was always to negotiate with power. The gods were not generous, they were bargaining partners. They listened, they watched, they nodded, or withdrew their nod. And every human act, every breath, could offend or appease them. In the centuries to come, as Christianity rose and pagan temples fell, the Numina would fade from memory, their whispers silenced beneath new creeds. But in their shadow, the spirit of Rome's earliest religion remained, the sense that the world is alive. That power is hidden, and that to abide by ritual was to hold the world in balance. Part 2. Thunder and Sacrifice, Temples, Cults, and the Divine Order. There were days in Rome when thunder cracked the skies, and men fell to their knees not from fear of lightning, but because they believed the gods were speaking. For the Romans, every storm carried a warning, every eclipse a sign, every failed harvest a consequence. In this empire of stone and law, religion was not a personal belief. It was a shared transaction, a system of appeasement, order, and control. The gods did not ask for your love. They demanded your obedience. And in the center of it all stood the temples, monumental and immovable. These structures were not houses of faith. They were negotiation chambers. Their stones echoed with sacrifice. Their altars were stained with blood. Inside, priests moved like shadows, veiled in linen, chanting formulas older than memory. At the heart of each temple stood the Keltesa relationship between Rome and its gods, maintained through precise, unyielding ritual. This was not myth, it was policy. Jupiter, Optimus, Maximus ruled the heavens from the Capitoline Hill. His temple loomed like a throne over the Forum Romanum. Senators offered bulls on feast days. Consuls vowed sacred games before battles. His presence was Rome's seal of legitimacy. If Jupiter turned his back, so too did the fortunes of empire. But the divine order ran deeper than any one god. Rome's religion was layered: state, cults, household spirits, ancestral rites, mystery religions. It was not uniform, but entangled, and beneath the grandeur of the Capitoline triad Jupiter, Juno, Minerva there pulsed older currents. Vesta's temple, round and eternal, housed the sacred flame of the city, tended by Vestal virgins. It was not just fire, it was Rome's soul. To let it die was to declare the city spiritually dead. The Vestals lived under sacred law, touchable, revered, feared, chosen before puberty. They served 30 years. Breaking their vows meant death, buried alive in chambers with no exits. Their purity was Rome's shield. Their failure was its curse. Beyond the official cults, Rome swelled with hundreds of smaller altars and shrines. Temples to Mars, Altar, the avenger god of Augustus. Sanctuaries of Bellona, the war goddess with frenzied priests who cut their own flesh. The temple of Saturn, where the chains of the god were loosened during Saturnalia, time of chaos, inversion, and release. And everywhere, sacrifices, blood, bone, fire offered to uphold Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods. The rituals were precise, mathematical, merciless. A priest must wear the correct garments. The words must be flawless. A sneeze, a faltering voice, a dog barking at the wrong time, and the ritual failed. It had to begin again. The gods were not forgiving. They required exactitude. For them, imperfection was insult. And so Rome built an army of priests to guard the mechanics of divinity. The pontifices, the architects of sacred law. The augurs, interpreters of divine will through birds, lightning, the crack of firewood. The flamens, priests of specific gods, bound by ritual codes. The haruspices, imparted from Etruria, reading fate from the steaming entrails of sacrificial animals. Each group played a role in the state's choreography of belief. Together, they maintained the illusion and the terror that the gods were always watching, always measuring Rome's worth. But not all religions in Rome were native. The city devoured foreign gods as it did provinces. When a new cult arrived, it was absorbed, renamed, or reshaped. Interpretatio Romana, Rome's custom of identifying foreign deities with its own transformed Celtic gods into Mercury, Egyptian Isis into Venus, Persian Mithras into Sol Invictus. These imported faiths carried darker tones, secret rites, initiations, blood baptisms, ecstatic visions. Mithraism, practiced in underground caves, involved the ritual slaying of a bull beneath a vaulted ceiling. Blood would cascade onto initiates as they stood beneath the altar, reborn into the brotherhood of the unconquered sun. The cult of Isis brought sacred processions, chants in foreign tongues, prayers over the dead. Followers believed she could save the soul after death, something the Roman state religion had never promised. These mystery religions offered intimacy, personal transformation, and hope. And as the empire aged, and the old gods became masks for power, the people began to search elsewhere for meaning. Still, the state pushed back. It preferred order, hierarchy, ritual. When cults threatened the balance, such as the Bacchanalia, infamous for orgies and political dissent, they were suppressed. When Christians began refusing to offer incense to the emperor's numen, they were branded traitors, not for disbelief, but for breaking the pact with the gods. Their executions were not just punishment, they were offerings, bloody reassertions of divine order. But by the 3rd century, cracks were showing. The gods no longer seemed to answer. Plagues decimated populations, crops failed, frontiers burned, and the rituals, no matter how exact, no longer worked. In desperation, emperors elevated the divine further. Aurelian declared Sol Invictus as supreme. Diocletian waged a war against Christian sects, trying to restore the favor of the old gods. But the temples were emptying. The people still offered, still sacrificed, but more out of fear than faith. The divine contract had begun to feel like a fraud. Rome's pantheon, once vast and interwoven, felt hollow. The mystery cults flourished. Christianity, despite its persecution, spread through households, markets, even the imperial court. When Constantine emerged, victorious beneath the symbol of the cross, it was not just politics, it was an epoch ending. The temples would be shuttered, the Vestals disbanded, the sacred fire extinguished. The gods that had governed Rome for 1,000 years were cast into silence. But they did not vanish. They remained etched into stone, carved into temples now taken over by churches, their symbols repurposed, their names whispered in forbidden circles. For centuries after, in rural corners of the empire, sacrifices continued in secret. Old rituals were performed in the guise of saints' feast days. The thunder still rolled across the skies, and some still believed that it was Jupiter's rage. Rome's religion was never about love. It was about fear, about order, about keeping the balance between man and God. It demanded blood, silence, submission, and in return it gave power, protection, the illusion of peace. But empires change, people shift, gods fall, and so the divine order fractured, leaving only echoes of thunder in ruined temples, and the faint smell of burnt offerings on forgotten altars. Until next time, stay safe, and see you in the next history.